this week has been a week. I know it's struggling. It's always when, you've got something that you're doing for God that, like, all the distractions happen, right? But this week has been a week of distraction. And so I'm excited for what God's put on my heart for you guys today. It's something that it's a message I started a long time ago, and God said, no, this isn't for now, this is for later. And so I saved it, and I was like, okay. And then as I was praying through, okay, God, what do you want me to share? He was like, go back to that message. And so this is something that I feel like I needed to. Usually when I preach, it's something I need to, okay? But I feel like a lot of us need it. But I want to start with something fun because I like visual aids, okay? All right, so quick poll. If you're driving somewhere and needing directions, which app do you use, Google or Apple? All right, so I'm going to need a show of hands. If we use Google, raise your hands. All you Android people use Google anyway, so. Yeah, and then Apple, the Maps, like the Maps app. The Maps app. Yeah, okay, it's like kind of split, honestly. I'm a little surprised. I think because it like came on my phone and it's right there and it works well with my Apple CarPlay, I use the Apple Maps. Sometimes I use Google. I feel like I use it when I'm in a bigger city. I feel like Google Maps is better in bigger cities. I don't know. And then there's like Waze. Does anyone still use Waze? Somebody, yeah, Lucas, okay, yeah. Okay, so like Waze, I remember when it came out, everyone was like, this is so cool. You could like pick celebrity voices for your directions and like, yeah. Well, and it tells you where the cops are, but Apple and Google do that now too. So yeah, that's good for people who have a lead foot. Not me. Oh wait, I just lied in church. But some of you don't even know how good you have it, okay? If you are younger than me in this room, you don't know how good you have it. Because, can we get that first one? Who remembers folded maps? Yeah, you kept it in your glove box or under your seat, right? Yeah, folded maps, okay. And then after folded maps came the Road Atlas. Y'all, this thick book literally had like every state with all the roads. And when you were going on a road trip, you literally had to like sit down before you left and like map out your way. And then heaven forbid a road is closed or you take a wrong turn, then you're like, okay, I got to figure this out. And you pull out your giant atlas and you map it. That was a lot. Okay, and then we had printed MapQuest directions. That was really, when I started driving, that was what we had, okay? So you literally had to go on your dial-up internet. Some of you don't even know what that is. Nobody could be on the phone, and you had to wait for the computer to make all these noises for like 5 minutes, and then it finally logged on, and then you had to go to this website called MapQuest, and you typed in your starting point and your ending point, and it gave you step-by-step directions, and it gave you a map, like an overview. And you printed it, and you brought it with you in the car. Yeah. So one time, when I was a teenager, this is what I had, okay? And I was driving to one of Ryan's basketball games, and I had a friend, a guy that was like 2 years older. He was in church with us, and he was one of Ryan's friends going with me to watch Ryan play, and we're driving along, and I missed a turn. And I look up and the sign says, welcome to Oklahoma. The problem is we lived in Arkansas and his game was in Arkansas. So I just missed a turn. Like where we were going was kind of near the state line. So I didn't go too far out of the way, but that was the struggle, y'all. Like we had that. Okay, and the next we had Garmin GPS. It mounted to your dash. There was no like real-time updates on it. Like you had to physically update it. Like you had to plug it into your computer to update it or connect it to your internet to update it. And then like it didn't, like a road's closed or something, it doesn't automatically reroute you. Like you have to figure things out, okay? It has progressed. They still sell these things, y'all. Just saying. But okay, and then we got lucky and we got to smartphones. And that's like our maps literally are integrated in our phones. And man, what a life changer that is, right? Who is directionally challenged? You used to be. You're not as bad anymore. We got some directionally challenged people. Okay. I typically have a very good sense of direction, but for some reason, when we moved to Oxford, I couldn't get my bearings. I think it's because it's like not on a grid. Like there's so many loops and curves and roundabouts. Oh my gosh, the roundabouts. And for some reason, like I still struggle on the square. I think I'm going the right way off the square, and I'm like, this is not the right way. The only grid in town I struggle with now. But I honestly, like, not gonna lie, I still map places here because there's so many ways you can get places, and it depends on like how much traffic or what's going on campus, or, so like sometimes it's quicker to go through campus and sometimes it's quicker to go around it. And so I still map places just to see what the fastest way, because I'm usually running late and need to get there the fastest way. Okay, amen. And I love that our maps now like update for traffic and road closures, and like that's great. And sometimes it like pops up like, there's a faster route available. Would you like to take it? Yeah, please. Push that button. Okay. But I remember when we weren't that lucky, right? And we just had to like trust the process. We couldn't see what was happening. Like you get in standstill traffic and you're like, I don't know why, or if we're going to move anytime soon. And now you can kind of see if you zoom out on your map. But sometimes, you can be moving along and then all of a sudden your ETA adds 45 minutes to it. You're like, well, all right. You zoom out and you see that there was a wreck or there's dreaded construction ahead, right? Sometimes it'll give you a faster route. Sometimes the best way is through the delay. The problem is when we think we know better than the maps, right? Like, especially if you grow up somewhere and you're like, I know how to get there. And then you're like stuck in something you can't get out of because you didn't trust the map. The map tells you a different way is better. And you're like, I know better than the map. But they're real-time updated with all the info. We have to zoom out to see the bigger picture because the map knows all the things that we don't. They see the hazards in our way. But unfortunately, that's how we treat our lives sometimes. We think we know what's best, and we don't even consult God and his plans for us. We talk to the people in our lives that we know are going to say what we want to hear, maybe not the people that are going to say what we need to hear. We take things in our own hands, which might seem good for a little bit, but ultimately usually ends in disaster. So today I want to talk to you about how do we stay on the path that God has for us. It's a big question, right? Like, how do we stay on the path that God has for us? Or what is the path that God has for us, right? We think we know, and then something we're like, okay, maybe that wasn't it. All right, let's try again. But today, that's what I want to dig into. And so the first thing that we can do to stay on the path that God has for us is that we trust that God is a promise keeper. I want to tell you first the story of Abraham. So we're going to be in Genesis 15. So the story of Abraham, if you've been in church, you know it. And if not, you're going to be like, huh? But in Genesis 15:2, it says, but Abram, so he was Abram, and then God changed his name to Abraham. So if you hear Abram, it's the same guy as Abraham, okay? Sovereign Lord, what can you give me since I remain childless, and the one who will inherit my estate is Eliezer of Damascus? And Abram said, you have given me no children, so a servant in my household will be my heir. Then the word of the Lord came to him, this man will not be your heir, but a son who is your flesh and blood will be your heir. He took him outside and said, look up at the sky and count the stars. If indeed you can count them, then he said to him, so shall your offspring be. So God made a promise to Abraham, and then he calls him to leave his home and travel to a land that he will show him. So he says, go to the land that I will show you. So he tells him to leave without telling him where to go, just go. But he promises a great nation and blessings for all people through him. That's a big deal, right? Like a really big deal. So they journey to Canaan. And then, so Abraham, along with his wife, so God changes her name to Sarah, and his nephew Lot travels to Canaan, where God confirms the promise to him. So even though God had promised Abraham and Sarah a son, they were getting old. And they started doubting that that was going to happen in the way that they thought it would. And they decided to take matters into their own hands. So Sarah gives Abraham one of her maidservants to marry and birth a child for him. So he marries and sleeps with Hagar, and she gives birth to a son, Ishmael. And even though it was Sarah's idea, it causes issues. Sarah gets jealous. There's all kinds of issues, right? Like, can you imagine your husband? Like, even though you're like, okay, you need a son, so, but then, like, there's this other woman and this other kid, and that, yeah, it'd cause issues, right? So God then reminds Abraham of the covenant that he had made with him again. He tells Abraham that he will be the father of many nations. Even after this, like he says, it's still going to happen, and this is not it. And so after years of waiting, Sarah gives birth to a son, Isaac, who's the son of promise. And it's when Abraham is 100 years old. But then having this son who is the promised son, it causes some issues and jealousy of Ishmael and Hagar. And Sarah tells Abraham to send them away. And so, Abraham's like torn. He's like, this is my child. But God says, don't worry, I will bless him as well, because he is your son. So what happens, though, is Abraham was impatient, and he didn't trust God's plan. God still fulfilled his plan and covenant with Abraham, but Abraham had extra mess and stress to deal with because he didn't trust God. How many times in our lives do we have extra mess and stress because we don't trust God? You see, God is a promise keeper, and if he promised you something, he's going to fulfill it. We have to trust him, and when we try to take things into our own hands, it brings mess and stress. There's enough of that in this world. You don't need to add any more to yourself. So we have to know, and we have to trust that God is a promise keeper. And the second thing we have to do is trust his path even when it's not easy. How many of you in this room have had an easy life where you've not had anything bad happen? Yeah, no hands, because we've all faced things that are hard. So I want to tell you the story of Moses, okay? Moses was born in Egypt during a time when the Israelites were enslaved by the Pharaoh. And to save him from the Pharaoh's decree to kill all the newborn Hebrew males, his mother places him in a basket and floats him down the Nile River. Can you imagine as a mother? Like, she hid him until he was 3 months old, and then she couldn't hide him anymore. So she put him in a basket and floated him down the river. So, God has a plan, right? And the Pharaoh's daughter ends up finding him and raising him as her own. There's a whole lot more to that story, y'all. It's a cool story if you've never read it. But then, after witnessing the suffering of his people, he finds out who he is. He witnesses the suffering of his people, and he witnesses and he kills an Egyptian taskmaker. Moses fled. There we go. Flees. We'll get this. Moses flees to Midian. And so then he goes from living in a palace as the Pharaoh's grandson, basically, because the Pharaoh's daughter took him in, right? So he goes from living in a palace to tending sheep. And while he's tending sheep, he encounters God in a burning bush. Another cool story, okay? If you've never read it, go check it out. And God commands him to return to Egypt and demand the release of the Israelites, of his people. So he goes and he demands the release of his people, and Pharaoh says no, right? And so then God sends 10 plagues on Egypt. So Moses, with the help of his brother Aaron, confronted the Pharaoh and demanded the release of the Israelites. And when the Pharaoh refused, God sent 10 plagues upon Egypt. It culminating in the death of the firstborns, which finally convinced the Pharaoh to let the Israelites go. So the Pharaoh lets them go. Have you ever heard, like, let my people go? Yeah, that's where that's from, okay? So Pharaoh lets them go. And now when the Israelites left, they're just like, they leave out what they can carry. And God didn't take them the easy way. We find that out in Exodus 14. When Pharaoh let the people go, God did not lead them on the road through the Philistine country, though that was shorter. For God said if they face war, they might change their minds and return to Egypt. So God led the people around the desert road towards the Red Sea. The Israelites went up out of Egypt ready for battle. So, even though God is freeing his people, he doesn't take them on the shortest path because he knew what would happen on the shortest path would make them turn back to their captivity. And then we get he led the Israelites out of Egypt and miraculously crossed the Red Sea after Moses raised his staff and the sea parted. Another cool story. You should go read if you haven't. And then Moses gets the 10 Commandments after wandering the desert for 40 years. And then Moses dies within sight of the promised land, but never entering it. So Moses was trusting God's path, but his path was never easy. God knew what it would take to get the Israelites to the promised land, where they wouldn't turn back to what was holding them captive, even though it was the easiest road. You see, sometimes when the path isn't easy, it's because God's protecting us from something else. Sometimes when God takes us out of something and the path is not easy, it's because he's protecting us from something else. You see, what they faced on that path was hard, but it wasn't as hard as it would have been if they would have gone back to their captors. So when we're on our path and things get hard, it doesn't mean God's not in it with us. That means that God's taking us to something greater. So how do we stay on the path God has for us? We trust that God is a promise keeper. We trust his path even when it's not easy. Ooh, and this third thing, y'all, is really hard for me. We have to let go of control. So this next story I'm going to tell you is familiar around this time of year, okay? Coming up on Easter. And we're in Matthew 26. I'm going to give you some context to set the scene for it, okay? This was actually before Jesus' crucifixion. And the setting is what you might call the Last Supper, when Jesus gathered with his most intimate friends, right? The 12 disciples. And around the table, he's having a very, very heartfelt conversation with them, knowing what was to come. The agony that he would endure on the cross, like he knew that was coming. And if you can imagine, for 33 years, Jesus had been obeying the Father, knowing the torture that was to come. And at that moment, he looks around the table full of this knowledge that one of his closest friends was going to betray him. And then he'd take the bread and break it. And you can imagine the emotion that he would have had when he said, "This bread is like my body, which is about to be broken for you." So he's taking this bread and breaking it, knowing that this is symbolizing what's about to happen to him. And then he held up a cup and said, "In this cup is the blood of the new covenant. This represents my blood, which will be shed for you." Knowing that his blood was about to be shed, he knew what was about to happen to him. And he says, "Whenever you gather together in years to come, do this in remembrance of me." Jesus knew what he was about to endure. He knew it was going to be hard. But he took it, and then he took his disciples to a place called Gethsemane, which means the crushing. And he said to his closest friends, hey, guys, sit here while I go pray. We're going to pray and we're going to praise and we're going to keep our guard up. And Jesus needed some intimate time with his Father. So he asked them to stay and he goes away a little bit. And then we get to Matthew 26:38, where Jesus says to his disciples, my soul is overwhelmed with sorrow to the point of death. Another gospel writer tells us that his brow, that when he was sweating, it was mixed with blood. He's in pure agony. And going a little further, he fell to his face on the ground. So you can imagine him going to his knees and then his face. And then he says, my Father, if it is possible, may this cup be taken from me. Like, is it an option for me to not have to go through this? Now, when he says the cup here, he's talking about the cup of suffering. And then he's saying, God, what I'm called to endure the next few hours, will you remove that from me? Can it not be my burden? Can it not be what I do? I'm overwhelmed to the point of death. God, please take this from me. He says, if it's possible. And then he says, yet not as I will, but as you will. If and yet. Then he returned to his disciples and he found them sleeping. Like he said, can you just pray? Like, you guys had one job. I gave you one job, stay awake, and you couldn't even do that one thing. Now, in their defense, I mean, I've fallen asleep praying a few times, okay? So sometimes it's difficult to stay awake when you're praying, but he asked them one thing, right? And then in Matthew 26:42, Jesus offers us a prayer before God that shows the most powerful words of surrender. So it says that Jesus went away a second time, which shows that surrender is not always a one-time event. Like, he went away, he said, take this cup from me if it's your will, but if not, I'll do it. And he goes back to his people who he finds sleeping. And he's like, gosh, and he goes away again. So surrender is not always a one-time event. Sometimes you have to go back to God another time to get it right. Sometimes it takes 10 times. So he goes a second time and he prays, my Father, if it's not possible for this cup to be taken away unless I drink it, may your will be done. If we could do it a different way, I'd love to do it a different way. But it's not my will, it's yours. Now, who in here has a problem with control like I do? Yeah, it's me. Okay, if everybody would just do things the way I told them to do it, their life would be perfect. It's true. Like, come on. No, I don't have that much power, but I think I do sometimes, okay? But I've always struggled with control. Like, come on, God, I know what's best for my life. But what do I do if I'm seeking God's will? I'm trying to follow Jesus. I'm praying for his will, and life is still so hard. Like, when I give up control, and it's still so hard. I need you to understand this today, that when it comes to God's will is rarely easy, but it's always good. God's will is rarely easy, but it's always good. It may not even feel good in the moment, but God's working all things to bring about good for those who love him and are called according to his purpose. His will is rarely easy, but it's always good. It wasn't easy at all for Jesus. Do you think that any of that was easy for him? No, it was hard, and it was more suffering than any of us will ever endure in this lifetime. And if you go back a generation, it wasn't easy at all for Jesus' mom, Mary, either. If you don't know her story, come back at Christmas and we'll be telling it, but I'll give you a recap, okay? So in the Christmas story, we see in Luke's gospel, an angel appears to Mary and says, you're going to be with child. You're going to give birth to a son. His name is going to be Jesus, and he's going to be the savior of the world. And she prays essentially the same prayer of surrender that Jesus said. May your will be done. She prayed, may it be done unto me according to your word. She says, I surrender. Whatever your will is, God, I want your will. How easy was it for her? Well, I mean, she was pretty successful. She gave birth to the Son of God. She raised Jesus, and he was perfect. How about that? But what was her reward for that? She watched her son stripped naked, suffering for sins he did not commit, and watched her son breathe his last breath on a cross and couldn't do anything to stop it. You see, God's will is not always easy, but it's always good. Jesus, he never wronged anybody, right? Like, he never sinned. He was completely without sin, holy and perfect in every way, and he was betrayed by one of his best friends, handed over and beaten without mercy. When they beat him, they'd have these rings, and they'd pound him in the face again and again, so his face wasn't even recognizable. They whipped him on his back with a whip that had glass and rocks in the leather, and it was tearing his back to where his organs were exposed. With the loss of almost too much blood to stay conscious, they forced him to carry a cross, drove stakes through his wrists and through his feet, stripped him naked, and hung this innocent man who did nothing but show love on a cross. They spit on him and they cursed him. That was Mary's reward. What's interesting is that Jesus did have the power to take control, right? Like, he was the Son of God. God 3 in 1, like all that confusing stuff, right? He could have like snapped his fingers. He could have walked away from it. He could have had a bunch of legions of angels come down and like do to the men to them, like do to those men what they were doing to him. He could have. And I probably would have. Yeah. If I was Mary, I'd be like, you do your thing, because I'm not watching this. He could have taken control, but instead he chose surrender. And when creation was mocking the Creator, he looked up into heaven, scorning the shame of the cross, and he prayed, Father, please forgive them, for they know not what they do. He said, it's finished. I've done what you sent me to do. And the ultimate act of surrender, Jesus said, into your hands I commit my spirit. And he gave his life. The world went dark, the earth shook, the temple veil ripped, the disciples scattered. Because God's will is not always easy, but it's always good. So Easter, coming up in 2 weeks, we celebrate that good. We celebrate the good will of God. That 3 days later, the tomb was empty and Jesus had risen from the dead. You see, Jesus trusted that God is a promise keeper. He trusted that God's word was true and faithful. He trusted that his sacrifice would be what God said it was for. He trusted the path even when it wasn't easy. None of that was easy. But he trusted God. And he let go of control. Then in Matthew 26:39, the key is found in 2 words in Jesus' prayer, if and yet. My Father, if it is possible, may this cup be taken from me, yet not as I will, but as you will. You see, real faith starts between the if and the yet. If you heal me, that would be great. Yet your will be done. If you could give me a job that has benefits, that would be amazing. But if not, yet your will be done. If I get into the college I want to go to, That'd be really cool, especially with a scholarship, right? Yet your will be done. If you heal my marriage, man, that's all I want. Yet your will be done. If you give me the child that I've been praying for, man, that's all my heart wants right now. But my heart wants your will, yet your will be done. If you heal my finances, if you heal the brokenness in my family, if all of your ifs, God hears them. But our ifs, it's okay. It's okay to take them to God. It's okay to want those things and to pray for the things that your heart desires. But the thing that your heart has to desire the most is God's will. And if your if is going above God's will, it's going to end in disaster. If, yet your will be done. Everything in culture invites us to live contrary to the gospel. If you take charge, you control your destiny. You make it happen. Manifest it. Hate that, y'all. Okay? Everything in our culture tells us, take control. Take control of your destiny. You know how I take control of my destiny? I say, if, yet your will be done. Because ultimately, my destiny lies with God. Worship team, can I have y'all head back up? So what in your life have you been saying, if? I'm not going to lie, like I've had times in my life that I've been like, okay, God, if this happens, I will never miss church again. Have y'all ever said that? Yeah, okay. I mean, honestly, like most of us probably have, right? If this happens, I will pray every day. If this happens, I will give up blank, 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 blank. Right? If this happens, I will never eat a donut again. And then they're at church. But no, for real though, like we give God these ultimatums. Like if this happens, then I'll choose to follow you. But what we have to decide is if we want his will. Matthew 10:39 says, if you cling to your life, you will lose it. But if you give up your life for me, you will find it. You see, the path to where we are today here hasn't been easy. There are hard things every day. Yet I want his will in my life because his will is so much better than anything I could ever do on my own. You see, sometimes our if lines up with God's will. The real test is what we do when it doesn't. So, what if have you been placing in front of God, in front of his will? Or what if has made you question your faith? You see, to follow Jesus is to surrender control. And like we learned with Jesus, like surrender isn't a one-time event. It's continuously surrendering your will for God's will. It's continuously surrendering the things that are in your way. Saying, yet your will be done. Surrender is a daily choice. And if we're being really honest, it's a multiple times a day choice. God can do way more with your surrender than you can do with your control. I'm going to say that again, okay? God can do way more with your surrender than you can do with your control. Saying that to myself too. You see, God is faithful. We have to trust that he's a promise keeper. We have to trust him because he is good. And we have to trust his path even when it's not easy. Y'all, we wouldn't be here. I fully believe that if we hadn't walked in the call God placed on our lives, he would have brought someone else to start this church, because I believe that this church is God's heart. But if we would have given up when it wasn't easy, when it wasn't our if, we wouldn't be here. So you have to trust the path even when it's not easy. And you have to let go of control. What are you holding on to? Not allowing God to work in because you think you know best. What do you have control of in your life that you need to surrender to God and say, yet your will be done? So today, I want to give us some time to pray and to really figure out what it is that's holding us back from a life of surrender. So in a minute, I'm going to give you the chance to come up for prayer. But Caleb, can you pull the lights down? Or I guess Caleb's not back there. Adrian, it's 5, I think, right? 5? Yeah, okay. I want us to take a minute and just listen to God. As I was talking, he might have already stirred in your spirit, this is something that you needed to hear, that you need to work on with one of these points or all of these points. And they're all up on the screen. If you didn't write them down, they're on the screen. You can look at them, read them. But what is God telling you that you need to do in order to be on the path that God has for you? Some of you are at decision points in your life, and you're praying for that path, for that will of God in your life. So what's in the way? Are we not trusting that God's a promise keeper, that he has a plan for your life? Are we giving up because it got hard? Are we holding so tight to our control that God's not able to do anything because we've got this grip on what we want, when what he has for us is way better? So I want to take a minute. I don't want y'all to sing. Just play the music in the background. But I want you to just take a minute and just be with God and see what it is that he's trying to speak to you through this.